Stephen K. Peeples here, and I'm with Steve Meyer, a former Capitol Records colleague of mine at the Tower in the late 70s and early 80s. And he went on to MCA Records after that, where he worked with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and all kinds of other folks. And one of the other primary artists at the time was Elton John. And so he had been on Geffen Records for a time, and you were there, Steve, when MCA re-signed him, right?
Yes, Irving Azoff brought Elton back to MCA in either late '86 or early '87, and our first release was a double pocket live album that Elton had recorded with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in Australia, and what we did was we put out a single, and the single was Candle in the Wind, which had never been released from Yellow Brick Road, even though it was all over radio and everybody knew the song. It had never been released as a single. And we put it out, and it was received with open arms at radio. And we actually took the record top 10. And it took the album into gold or platinum status later, and it brought Elton right back to radio, and it was for us a tremendous way to welcome him back to the label. Shortly after that, 6 months maybe or 8 months later, he prepared his release for his next studio album, which would be our first studio album under the new MCA. It was called Reg Strikes Back, Reginald being Elton's first real name.
Right.
And we had a single on that called I Don't Want to Go On With You Like That, that actually went to number 2, was his biggest hit in the 80s and 90s. Before or during the album, and I'm not sure about the exact time frame, I think it was Richard Palmese, who was our general manager or president under Irving, who had the idea that we should take Elton around to media on a media tour around the United States. So we took Elton and Bernie, and Richard, myself, and our VP of sales. We actually took him to 10 cities in 2 separate trips, all the major cities, though, New York, Atlanta, Chicago, San Francisco, LA. On one of those trips, we were in private jets. I sat next to Elton a great deal of the time and had conversations with him. During one of those conversations, I happened to mention something. Oh, there was a book out at that time that was very, very negative about John Lennon. It had come out. Mm-hmm. I think it was called The 9 Lives of Lennon or something.
The Lives of John Lennon.
Yeah, it was a very, very negative portrait of John. And we started talking about that. And Elton was really upset about it. He's Sean Lennon's godfather. And I said, when I met him, I just can't imagine. And he went, "What do you mean you met him?" And I said, "Well, I was at Capitol Records 14 years. And I had the opportunity to actually meet him when the Imagine album went to number 1. And I spent an evening with him, and we started talking. Elton said, "Well, what did you think of it?" And I said, "Well, it's really strange that you asked that, because he had this incredible, and for lack of a better term, an aura about him. And I can't express it, but he had this presence." And Elton said, "He was a bloody saint." And I said, "Well, for lack of anything else, Elton, that fits perfect." And we started talking more and more. And he said, "I just can't believe this guy would put this book out, and nobody knows the great stories about John." And I said, "Well, they'll get told, don't worry." And he said, "Well, you know what he did for me?" He said, "When I played Madison Square Garden the first time, I got very sick, and I wasn't going to perform that night. But I told the doctor, I'm going to do it. I'm going to play. But I was sick enough that I couldn't do something that I wanted to do, and that was I didn't I wanted to greet my parents at Kennedy Airport and bring them to the show. They were flying in from UK. And he expressed that to several of his friends, including John. And he told me that John said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. So John got a limo and went out to the airport, and he took Elton's parents to that show. And we spent about an hour talking about John Lennon stories. And then finally, I said to him, you wrote this song, Empty Garden, and I know it's about John, and why don't you do it again? And he said, well, I haven't done it for years because it breaks me. It's a very sad song and it reminds me of John. I said, yeah, but maybe if you did it now and you did a little preface to it, screw the book, and he thought about it. And within a short period later, and I don't remember if it was months or weeks, he ended up playing a concert at the Boston Garden. And he did the song, but he prefaced it by doing a speech about this book and how he hated it and how it wasn't the John Lennon that he knew and that he wanted the world to remember. And he did Empty Garden. Well, it got written up in every newspaper, including USA Today, which of course is national. And he called me the next day after the concert. He said, look what it did. And I said, well, there you go. And I said, you're going to continue doing it? He said, yeah, no, I'm going to do it for the rest of the tour. And he did. And every place he did it, he did that same speech. And it was a tremendous reaction from the audience, of course, who loved John as well. So I just love it that I was with him and talking about that. And he would always just talk about John in the most beautiful ways, almost like they were brothers. And that's the only way I can describe it.
Did you guys ever talk about the Madison Square Garden gig, Elton's gig, where John was backstage and kind of reconnected with Yoko Ono? That was
no.
73, Thanksgiving,
No.
73.
No, I didn't talk about,
or 74. I might have that screwed up, but yeah, one of the two.
No, I was also, I talk about Madison Square Garden. I had the blessing of attending an Elton concert at the Garden in, I don't know, 80, 87, 80, 89, whatever year it was. And he mentioned my name from the stage, and I had friends in the audience. So I've never forgotten that. I attended many of his live shows, and whenever I attended, he wouldn't let me sit in the audience. He always wanted me to be near the stage or on the stage. He was an incredibly gracious artist. He kept details about so many of us that worked with him. When my birthday came, and no one knew my birthday because I didn't celebrate my birthday, and I don't know how he found out, but when my birthday came, there was a gift delivered to my house, and it was from Elton John, and just an incredibly gifted, gracious artist that I was privileged to work with. It was truly an amazing experience, and we got to talk about so much that I wish I had literally kept a diary. I asked him about how long did it take you and Bernie to write Yellow Brick Road, and his response literally shocked me. He said it all came out in 3 days, and I said, "What? It's a double pocket album." He said it flowed out of us from beginning to end. And I said, well, that's funny because that's what I've heard now from several artists. When it happens like that, it comes in floods. And we talked about such a variety of topics. Again, and I recall them sometimes, either when I'm listening to music or I'm watching TV. But things he said and things he did, just a great artist.
You worked a number of his singles aside from that as well. What were the ones that you thought were
Well, we
most
had
best?
we had the live Candle in the Wind, which went top 10, and then when the studio album Red Strikes Back came, we had I Don't Want to Go On With You Like That, and that went to number 2, and it stayed at number 2 for I think it was more than a week, but it was a huge hit. It went to number 1 in a couple of places, maybe Radio and Records, which based their chart more on airplay than sales,
Mhm.
but that album was a huge success. And then after that, we had about 4 or 5 top 15 or 20 records. A Word in Spanish, Healing Hands. The biggest one probably that people might remember, which came out at a very, very bad time because CHR radio was starting to fragment very, very badly. So ballads by white pop artists started decreasing in content percentages at a lot of stations, but the record where it went on became a very, very big record, and that was a song called Sacrifice, which you might remember.
Yeah.
And had CHR not fragmented that at that point, the record probably would have been a solid top 10 record, where it mostly was at every station. But I think it went top. I know it went top 20, and I think it went top 15.
Yeah, made it to number 18, and that was from Sleeping with the Past, the third album
That's that was that yeah.
in
I think that was
1989.
yeah, and I don't remember the album after that. That might be the last album that I worked.
There
There might have
there was a hits album that they released after that, and then
there was a
a
huge
duets album.
yeah.
Did you have
Yeah.
anything to do with the duets album? That was 91.
No,
Okay, so
no.
you were gone by then, or
I don't know. I left in the 91 at some point. I don't think there was a single on the duets. Was there a single?
well, a couple of live singles that Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. Live version of that was with George Michael was a big hit.
Yeah, that was the one that was all over MTV at that all
Yeah.
over that was the huge video.
Right.
Yeah, no, but I didn't promote that.
Gotcha. So you said you spent some time on the road with them and traveling with them. I'm kind of interested in what you thought about the band that was playing with them very quickly. Did you ever have any contact with any of the musicians that were playing with them?
No, when I was traveling with him, when we did the media tour, it was just Elton and Bernie.
Yeah.
And when I went to travel to see him live, and he would actually call sometimes. He would actually call Richard Palmese sometimes and say, "Are you coming to the show?" Or in Dallas, and Richard would say, "No, I've got to do this," and he'd say, "Well, I want Steve there," and so Richard would come over and say, well, book your ticket to Dallas. Elton wants one of us there. So, and that's the way I went to a lot of the dates. I didn't interact with the band that much, but I got to tell you, as you well know, that is one of the best bands ever in the history of rock and roll.
Yes.
And most of the key players have been with them forever.
Right. Well, Steve, that was great. Really appreciate your sharing your Elton memories. And on to the next one, eh?
You got it, my friend.
All right. Be well.
Bye-bye.